you don't want to move very fast. You want to try to keep something between you and your target. So you're not in the open. You know, the Montana wilderness has always held secrets. Wild, untamed, and silent. But today, the silence surrounding one man's cabin has shaken even the toughest mountain folks. Just 1 minute ago, authorities revealed what they found inside Tom Oar's secluded log home. And the details are beyond chilling. For years, Tom, the star of mountain men, represented everything pure about the American frontier. Hard work, self-reliance, and peace away from the modern world. Yet, when no one heard from him for weeks, concern quickly turned into fear. Neighbors who'd long admired the smoke rising from his chimney suddenly saw nothing but still air. The cold mountain wind blew through the valley, but no sign of life came from Tom's cabin. That's when rangers decided to check on him. What they discovered after forcing open that old wooden door would stun even the most seasoned survivalist. Before we reveal what was found, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see mountain men forever. When rangers arrived at Tom Oar's property, the snow was knee-deep and the wind howled through the Yak Valley like a warning. His truck sat buried beneath a thin crust of ice and his dogs were nowhere to be seen. The front door, usually latched tight with a hand-carved wooden bar, hung slightly open, something no mountain man would ever allow. As the first ranger stepped inside, his breath caught. The cabin was dark, silent, and freezing. The hearth stone cold as if it hadn't burned in weeks. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and a strange metallic scent lingered. Half rust, half wilderness. Every detail of Tom's life remained untouched. A deer hide still stretched on the frame, his handmade knife. Gleaming on the table, an old mug resting beside it with a film of frozen coffee inside. It looked as if he'd simply stepped outside and never returned. On the far wall, a calendar was frozen in time, its last date circled in red, October 3rd. Beside it, pinned under a knife, was a scrap of leather with the words, "Keep the fire alive." None of the officers could explain the eerie stillness, or why a faint humming could be heard beneath the floorboards, like a wind trapped underground. They searched every corner, his trapping gear, the attic crawl space, the supply shed. But there was no sign of a struggle and no footprints leading away from the cabin. One ranger, a local who'd known Tom for years, whispered, "It's like he just vanished." But something about the air felt wrong. Heavy. Almost charged. Then, while checking under the main rug near the wood stove, they noticed the faint outline of a wooden hatch. Something not listed in any of Tom's known designs. When they pried it open, a rush of stale, cold air escaped, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine resin. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Flashlights revealed old planks, carved beams, and something else. Boxes sealed with wax and wrapped in animal hide. Each was labeled with faded markings and dates spanning decades. The team hesitated, unsure if they should proceed. One officer radioed for guidance, but before he could finish his call, his flashlight flickered out. In that instant, everyone heard it. A faint echo rising from below. 3 slow knocks. When the light came back on, the hatch seemed to pulse with frost, as if something inside was breathing cold air upward. They closed it immediately and backed away, shaken. Whatever was down there, it wasn't on any official record, and no one could explain why the floorboards were warmer around the hatch than anywhere else in the cabin. The rangers sealed the property that night, leaving with more questions than answers. What was Tom hiding beneath his home? And more importantly, did he ever mean for anyone to find it? The following morning, a small team returned to Tom Oar's cabin under strict orders to document everything beneath that hatch. The storm from the night before had blanketed the entire area in silence, and the air was so cold it bit at their lungs. When they stepped inside, the cabin seemed even darker than before, as though the woods themselves were watching. The same humming was still there, faint, but rhythmic, pulsing through the wooden floor like a heartbeat. With cameras rolling, they lifted the hatch again. A bitter gust swept out, carrying the smell of damp pine and burnt oil. The staircase creaked as they descended, their boots sinking slightly into the earthen floor below. What they found made every hair on their neck stand up. Dozens of leather-bound journals were stacked neatly in wooden crates, each sealed with rope and wax. The earliest dated back to 1972, years before Tom had ever appeared on Mountain Men. Each journal was marked with a symbol that looked hand-carved, a circle split by a single line down the middle. When they opened the first book, the pages were covered in tiny, meticulous handwriting. Tom's handwriting. At first, it was what they expected. Stories of trapping seasons, weather notes, and hand-drawn maps of hunting trails. But as they turned the pages, the tone shifted. One entry read, "The light came again last night. The dogs hid under the bed. I heard it humming through the trees." Another mentioned voices carried by the wind, whispering N patterns that repeated for hours. Some entries were smudged, the ink blurred by what appeared to be tears or rain. Others were torn out completely. One journal even had a bullet hole clean through its center. As they examined more, they noticed the sketches, drawings of figures standing among the pines with reflective eyes and elongated limbs. A few of the drawings were dated on the same day the local forestry department had reported unknown aerial sounds echoing across the valley. The deeper they read, the more it felt like Tom had been documenting something far beyond survival. Tucked inside the last journal was a folded piece of parchment sealed with red wax. Written across it in shaky letters were the words, "If you're reading this, it's already too late." At that moment, the generator powering their lights began to sputter. The cabin above groaned as if something heavy had shifted. One of the rangers insisted they leave immediately, while another reached for his camera. But before they could capture the scene, every light went out at once. In that pitch-black silence, one ranger swore he heard the same 3 knocks from beneath the earth again. Slow, deliberate, and closer than before. When the team returned with backup, the atmosphere inside Tom Oar's cabin felt heavier, like the walls themselves had absorbed whatever was down there. They brought in forensic experts, environmental scientists, and even a historian familiar with local folklore. Each of them approached the journals carefully, wearing gloves as if the pages might crumble at a touch. The air smelled faintly of pine and metal, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate turn of paper. The first few notebooks seemed harmless. Daily routines, hand-drawn maps, detailed notes about tanning hides and setting traps. But the further they went, the more erratic the writing became. Tom's normally neat handwrit ing grew uneven, the ink darker and pressed deep into the pages, almost as if he had written in anger or fear. One journal described glowing lights that hovered silently over the treeline for hours at a time. Another detailed a low hum that made the ground shake and caused nearby animals to flee in panic. But the most disturbing entry was dated just 2 nights before Tom's last known sighting. They were closer tonight. It read, "The shapes didn't move like men. The light isn't from fire. It breathes." Alongside the entry was a drawing of 3 tall figures standing behind his cabin, their faces obscured by shadows with circles carved into their chests. Investigators who read those words felt an unease that no one wanted to admit out loud. One of them, a veteran officer, said quietly. He wasn't imagining this. He saw something. Even stranger were the stains on several pages, reddish-brown, confirmed later to be animal blood. Though no one could explain why Tom would smear it across his own notes. In the final journal, there was a section sealed shut with candle wax. After carefully peeling it open, they found a small photograph tucked inside. A blurry image of the forest at night with a faint glowing orb hovering above the trees. The timestamp indicated it was taken 3 weeks before his disappearance. Experts tried to analyze it, but the negatives were missing. The local sheriff's department ordered the materials locked away for further study. Yet within days, unmarked vehicles arrived to transport everything out of the valley. Residents said men in dark uniforms carried sealed boxes into their trucks, refusing to answer questions. Even stranger, the hatch under Tom's floor was later filled with concrete, sealing it permanently. When asked why, officials claimed it was for safety reasons. But locals weren't buying it. They believed Tom had stumbled upon something ancient, something buried deep in the mountains that was never meant to be unearthed. And if his journals were warning, it might already be too late to stop whatever he found. Not long after the investigation began, strange reports started flooding in from locals living near Tom Oar's property. People who had known him for decades claimed the woods around his cabin no longer felt the same. The air was thicker, heavier, and wildlife had vanished almost overnight. Deer stopped coming near the salt licks, and wolves that once roamed freely now avoided the area entirely. One neighbor, an old trapper named Bill, said he began hearing a low howling sound every night around midnight. Long, drawn out, and unlike any animal he'd ever heard before. The tone wasn't natural, almost mechanical, like metal scraping against bone. He claimed the sound always came from the direction of Tom's cabin. Another resident, a hunter who'd ventured near the property, said his flashlight flickered off and his compass spun wildly in circles the closer he got. He swore he saw faint lights moving between the trees, pale blue, floating just above the ground. When he tried to take a photo, his phone battery drained instantly. It wasn't long before word spread through the valley that Tom's land was cursed. But some locals believed something else entirely. That Tom had been protecting them from whatever was hidden beneath that cabin. And now that he was gone, the thing he kept buried had finally been released. Park rangers began receiving calls from hikers reporting guttural screams echoing across the valley at night. Some described hearing footsteps behind them, though no one was there. Others said they found strange symbols carved into trees, circles with a single line through the middle identical to the marks on Tom's journals. Despite growing panic, officials downplayed the events, blaming weather patterns and wild animals. But privately, the sheriff admitted his own patrol team had refused to return to the area after hearing unexplainable noises during a nighttime sweep. To make things worse, search drones sent to map the forest crashed one after another. Their signals lost near the same coordinates. Tom's cabin. Even those brave enough to visit the site in daylight spoke of feeling an intense static energy, like standing too close to a live wire. Bill, the old trapper, put it best. That land's breathing now. It's alive. Whatever Tom found down there, it's awake. Whether it was folklore or something real, one thing was certain. The wilderness around Tom Oar's cabin had changed forever. Within days of the eerie reports, the Yak Valley was suddenly flooded with unfamiliar vehicles. Black SUVs and unmarked trucks rolled quietly through the dirt roads, their tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside.